There are also aromatic compounds, and aromatic hydrocarbons always contain what's called the benzene ring. And this is an example of a benzene ring. And they're called aromatic because they have very powerful aromas. Not necessarily good, but always powerful. So we can see we have 6 carbons in a ring, and they have alternating double bonds. And those double bonds could change places. It could be here, 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 or alternately here, 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 but it's always every other one. And here you can see that same shorthand. Okay, functional groups are how we look at organic compounds, and this is from your book. And they have in your book highlighted in green the parts that are important. So for example, we already talked about alkenes. That means they have to have a double bond. So you can see this part here is in green, the C double bond C. And notice over here they have it in a structure. You can see that part's green. Now the alkynes, when they have a triple bond, so you can see here C triple bond C, that means it's an alkyne. Now alcohols have an OH grouping on the end. If it's an ether, that means there's an O in between 2 carbons. And for carbon groupings, they call them Rs. That just means it's not one carbon. It could be several carbons, like a chain on either side. But you have to have an O in between 2 carbons to make it an ether. An aldehyde has a C double bond O and then with an H. Ketones are another functional group. Carboxylic acids are one that we're going to look at, and they have this part here, pink for you. Esters we're also going to look at more in depth. But those are several different functional groups. And that is the way that we name them according to their functional group. And it also predicts a lot of the properties for us. So that next group that was on there is called the hydroxyl group, which means it has OH, and that is distinctive of an alcohol. So all alcohols will have an OH on the end. Now, if I wanted to name this, I only have 1 carbon, so 1 means meth. But instead of calling it methane, since I have an alcohol, it's called methanol. And in this case, I have 2, so 2 means eth. So instead of being ethane for an alkane, we call it ethanol for an alcohol. So all of your alcohols, butanol, propanol, we can tell they're alcohols because they end in that OL. And this one would be 1 propanol, 1, 2, 3. 3 means prop. And then since it's an alcohol, it ends in OL. Now methanol is a lot of times called wood alcohol. And here's the C with 3 H's and then the OH. It's also used as a solvent. And it's also being looked at as a fuel replacement. Ethanol is grain alcohol, so this is the one that's distilled from grains, and this is the one that we typically drink. And it's also being looked at as far as fuel replacements. The only difference here is I have 2 carbons. So ethanol is the one that we're going to find in our drinks, and of course that's also the one that we put in our gas tanks. Now all alcohols, whether it's methanol, ethanol, propanol, butanol, all of them are toxic. Methanol, which is the wood alcohol, can lead to blindness and death. Ethanol, of course, we have drunk driving, we have alcoholism, fetal alcohol syndrome. All of those are effects. And obviously we know if we drink too much alcohol, our body knows it's toxic, and that's why it starts to, a lot of times people vomit. That's because there's too much alcohol in their system, and in order to get rid of it, you'll simply throw it up. But that's an indication that alcohol is toxic. And we know it's toxic. It can even be fatal. So long-term effect of alcohol consumption are nerve damage, alters the brain cell function, not just for adults, but especially this is a problem in teenagers because the brain is still under development, and it does shorten the lifespan and of course hurt your kidneys. Phenols are another group, and a phenol has an OH, just like an alcohol, except it's attached on a benzene ring. So here's our benzene ring with that OH on it. Carboxylic acids I'm going to take a look at here in a little. We're going to focus on those a little bit. They have to have the COOH group, so if you ever see COOH in a formula, then that is a carboxylic acid, and it's a C double bond O and then an OH. It's called the carboxyl group. And if it has a carbon attached over here to this carboxyl group, then that represents a carboxylic acid. Now, esters use those carboxylic acids, so we have to have a carboxylic acid and an ethanol or an alcohol get together. And that is what's going to make an ester. And esters have fruity smells, so a lot of our additives and artificial flavorings that we're going to find in our foods, candy, gum, those kind of things, those are caused by esters. And if we have very, very long chains of esters, those are called polyester, which are used in fabrics. So in this case, I have some kind of a carboxylic acid, because I can see the C double bond OOH, and it's together with some kind of an alcohol. So as long as I have a carboxylic acid and an alcohol, then I'm going to make an ester. And we can see here the ester has a C double bond O and then O, and then it's going to have a C instead of an H. So that's how I recognize what an ester is. So esters, a lot of times fragrances and colors. So here they're going to give you several different examples of esters. And here are the different fragrances that those would make. So for example, if this is apple, then we can look over here at this formula. And if I look over here at this part, this is the part that came from the alcohol. So this alcohol, since it has one carbon, would be meth, and it would be methanol. And then over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, this part is the part that came from the carboxylic acid. In fact, you can see there's this C double bond O that's in it. And since there's 4 carbons, that would be butyric acid. So I take the part that's the alcohol, the methanol part, and I call it methyl. And then this part becomes butyrate. Now this one is very similar, except I have 2 in my alcohol. So so ethyl, and then I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, ethyl butyrate. And if I would go down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this would be my alcohol. So 5 is pent, so pentyl. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons, that's my butyrate. So that's how we're going to name our esters. We always look at the last part after the OO. That part comes from my alcohol, so you can see 2 carbons is ethyl. And the first part comes from the name of our carboxylic acid. So, name the alcohol. And then we name the acid and we put the suffix ate at the end. For example, methyl butyrate was the one that we looked at. So this was from the methanol, this one was from the butyric acid. And that would conclude the end of this chapter.